Sophia Carter had always dreamed of the sea. Growing up, she would hear stories of sailors exploring distant lands, of vast oceans full of mysteries and adventures. As an adult, she married Mark, a man who shared her love for the ocean. Together, they had a daughter, Lily, and it didn't take long before they started planning their greatest adventure yet, a long sailing trip along the Pacific coast. The idea was simple yet exciting. They would take a few weeks off, sail on their little boat, and enjoy the peaceful life on the water. It was their chance to disconnect from the stress of everyday life and spend quality time together as a family. Mark had always dreamed of this moment, and Sophia, too, was thrilled at the thought of escaping their busy routines. Lily, their 6-year-old, was especially excited. She loved the idea of waking up to the sound of the ocean, playing on the beach, and seeing dolphins swimming by. They prepared everything for months, choosing the best boat, packing enough supplies, and making sure Lily had her favorite toys and books to keep her entertained during the journey. The family was full of excitement, and the day they set sail, the sun was shining brightly, casting a golden glow on the water. It felt like a dream come true. For the first few days, everything was perfect. Mark steered the boat with skill, while Sophia enjoyed the fresh air and the sound of the waves. They fished together, laughed, and spent time exploring small islands. Lily loved every moment, especially when they would stop at an island to stretch their legs and play in the sand. She had even made friends with a few local kids they met during their brief stops, and the family felt like they had everything they could ever want. However, on the 5th day of their journey, something unexpected happened. The weather changed rapidly. The sun disappeared behind dark clouds, and a strong wind began to blow. The waves grew larger, and the boat rocked violently. Mark and Sophia tried to stay calm, but they both knew something was wrong. They'd sailed through small storms before, but nothing like this. The storm grew worse as night fell. The wind howled, and the waves became towering, crashing against the boat with a deafening roar. Sophia, terrified, held Lily close while Mark struggled to keep the boat on course. It was impossible to see anything through the heavy rain, and the boat was tossed around like a toy on the ocean. For hours, the family fought against the storm, but it seemed like they were losing. Around midnight, a huge wave struck the side of the boat, knocking it over. Sophia screamed as she was thrown into the cold water. She tried to reach Mark and Lily, but the current was too strong. The last thing she remembered was seeing the boat sinking beneath the waves, and then everything went black. When Sophia woke up, she was lying on a beach, cold and confused. Her head throbbed, and her body ached. She struggled to stand up, looking around for any sign of Mark or Lily, but there was nothing. The storm had swept them away, and the boat was gone. In the distance, she saw the faint outline of a rescue boat coming towards her. They found her, alone. Sophia was taken to the nearest hospital, where doctors treated her for minor injuries and exhaustion. But her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about her family. Where were they? Were they alive? Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Search teams scoured the ocean, looking for any trace of Mark or Lily, but they found nothing. As time passed, Sophia refused to believe they were truly gone. She clung to the hope that Mark and Lily were somewhere, waiting to be found. But deep down, she knew the truth. They were lost at sea. The pain of that thought was unbearable, but there was nothing she could do. She had no choice but to face the reality of her life now, alone. For the next few years, Sophia tried to rebuild her life, but it was never the same. She lived in a small apartment, keeping to herself and working long hours. Every day, she thought about her family. The memories of Mark's laugh, Lily's bright smile, and their happy times together haunted her. And no matter how hard she tried to move on, she couldn't forget them. But as the years passed, the pain began to dull. She had moments of joy, moments of peace, but nothing could ever fill the hole in her heart. She would always be a mother without a daughter and a wife without a husband. and that emptiness was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. 7 years had passed since that tragic night at sea. Sophia Carter had tried to move on, but the pain of losing her family never truly left. Every corner of her apartment, every street she walked, reminded her of Mark and Lily. The photo frames, now covered in dust, still held their smiling faces from a time before the storm. But Sophia couldn't bring herself to throw them away. The memories were all she had left. She had thrown herself into her work after the tragedy. She became a marketing manager at a small firm in Seattle, but work was never enough to fill the emptiness inside her. She found herself spending long hours in the office, hoping the work would distract her from the grief that never seemed to go away. It didn't help. The loneliness crept in at night when she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking of what might have been. Sophia avoided seeing her friends and family. They had tried to help her at first, sending messages of comfort, offering to spend time with her. But Sophia couldn't stand their pitying looks, the way they tried to pretend everything was fine. How could they understand? How could anyone understand the pain of losing the two people you loved most in the world? No, it was easier to stay isolated, to avoid the constant questions, the sympathy that only reminded her of what she had lost. Her life had become a routine. She would wake up each morning, go to work, and then return home to her lonely apartment. There was no excitement, no purpose. The world outside seemed to move on without her. It was like she had been forgotten, as if she had become a shadow of the woman she once was. The woman who had been full of dreams and love, the woman who had had a family. Sometimes, Sophia would walk through the city after work, lost in her thoughts. She walked slowly, her eyes downcast, not wanting to meet anyone's gaze. She passed by the busy shops and cafes, watching families and friends laugh and talk. It hurt. Every smile, every happy conversation felt like a reminder of what she no longer had. But she couldn't stop walking, couldn't stop hoping that one day something would change, that maybe, just maybe, she would find a way to feel whole again. One night, after a particularly hard day at work, Sophia decided to take a different route home. The rain had started to fall heavily, the streets glistening under the streetlights. It was quiet, almost peaceful, with the hum of traffic in the distance and the soft sound of her footsteps echoing in the empty alleyways. She liked the quiet. It gave her a chance to think, to be alone with her thoughts. As she walked, her mind wandered to the past, to Mark and Lily. What were they doing now? Were they happy? Were they safe? The questions always lingered, unanswered. But tonight, her thoughts were interrupted. As she walked down an alley, she felt a strange sensation. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, and she slowed her pace, glancing around. The alley was dark, lit only by a few weak streetlights. There was no one else around. She felt a shiver run down her spine. Something didn't feel right. Suddenly, she heard footsteps behind her. It was too quiet, too eerie. She stopped, her heart racing in her chest. The footsteps stopped too. She turned around quickly, but there was no one there. Just the empty alley, the rain, and the sound of her own breath. She tried to convince herself it was nothing, but the feeling of unease lingered. Her instincts were on high alert. Then, out of nowhere, she saw movement in the shadows. A figure appeared, slowly emerging from the darkness. It was a girl, standing still and staring at her with wide, frightened eyes. At first, Sophia couldn't make out any details, just the shape of the girl in the dim light. But then, as the girl stepped forward, Sophia's breath caught in her throat. The girl had the same blue eyes as Lily. For a moment, Sophia couldn't breathe. She stood frozen, staring at the girl. Her heart pounded in her chest. Could it really be? Was it possible? Could this girl be Lily? It didn't make sense. How could she be here, after all these years? And why was she standing alone in a dark alley? Sophia took a step forward, her voice trembling as she whispered, "Lily." The word felt strange on her tongue, as if it had been too long since she had said it. But the girl flinched, stepping back into the shadows. Sophia took another step, her heart racing. "Lily, is that you?" she asked again, her voice more urgent now. The girl didn't answer, but Sophia could see her face, the fear in her eyes. And then, without warning, the girl turned and ran, disappearing into the darkness of the alley. Sophia stood there, stunned, unable to move. The girl had looked so much like Lily. But it couldn't be her. It couldn't. But the feeling in her chest told her otherwise. Could it be? Had she really just seen her daughter again? After all this time, Sophia stood frozen in the alley, her heart hammering in her chest. The rain fell in a steady rhythm, but her mind was racing. She had seen her daughter. At least, she thought she had. The girl in the alley looked exactly like Lily. It was impossible, but it had to be her, right? Her heart wouldn't let her believe otherwise. She stood there for what felt like an eternity, staring into the darkness where the girl had disappeared. The sound of her breath, shallow and quick, echoed in the alley. The uncertainty was suffocating. What if it wasn't Lily? What if she had just imagined it, the way her mind sometimes played tricks on her? But the girl's eyes, those familiar blue eyes, would not leave her thoughts. They were Lily's eyes. Sophia's mind spun as she fought to make sense of what had just happened. She felt a sudden pull in her chest, a need to know, to find answers. Was this a sign? Was there some explanation for how her daughter could still be alive after all these years? She had to know more. She couldn't just walk away from this moment. Without thinking, she began walking in the direction the girl had run, her footsteps quick and anxious. The alley stretched on, narrowing as she moved deeper into the shadows. The light from the street lamps was faint now, and the darkness seemed to swallow everything around her. But she didn't care. She was determined. As she turned a corner, she saw a flicker of movement ahead. It was the girl again, standing at the edge of the alley, barely visible in the dim light. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. She was close. Her heart skipped a beat as she called out softly, "Lily." The girl flinched, as if startled by the sound of her name. She didn't turn around, but her posture stiffened. There was something in the way she stood, something that told Sophia she was scared, hesitant, unsure of what to do next. "Lily, please," Sophia's voice cracked, pleading. "I'm not going to hurt you. It's me, your mom. Please, look at me." The girl hesitated for a moment, then slowly turned to face her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, but Sophia could see the faintest hint of recognition in them. It was Lily. She was standing right there, alive, in front of her. Tears filled Sophia's eyes as she took another step forward, but the girl took a step back, shaking her head. She looked terrified, as if she wanted to run again. I can't," the girl whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm not supposed to be here." Sophia stopped in her tracks, her heart sinking. "What do you mean? Why can't you be here? Where have you been all these years? Why did you run from me?" The girl's eyes darted nervously around the alley, as if she were afraid someone was watching. "I can't talk here," she whispered urgently. "It's not safe. I'm not supposed to be with you. He'll be angry." Sophia's confusion deepened. Who will be angry? The girl glanced around again, her expression filled with panic. I can't say. He'll know. He's always watching." Sophia's heart raced faster. There was something wrong here. Something dark. Who was this person she was talking about? Was it Mark? But no, it couldn't be. Mark had disappeared with her, hadn't he? Or had he? Was he somehow involved in this? "Please, tell me where you've been. Tell me what's been happening," Sophia begged, her voice trembling with desperation. The girl took a deep breath, her hands shaking. "I don't have time. I can't stay." Then, before Sophia could say another word, the girl turned and ran again, disappearing into the shadows of the alley. Sophia stood there, stunned, unable to move. What just happened? Was it really Lily? Or was it someone else who just looked like her? And who was this mysterious person the girl had spoken of, the one who was always watching? Every instinct in Sophia's body told her she needed to follow, to find her daughter and get answers. But she hesitated, the weight of fear and uncertainty keeping her in place. She didn't know who she was dealing with, or what kind of danger was involved. All she knew was that her daughter was out there, alive, but lost in a world of shadows and secrets. Sophia stood in the alley for a moment longer, trying to steady her breath. Her heart was still racing. She had to make a choice, follow the girl and risk everything, or walk away and let her go. But there was no way she could let her go, not again. Sophia stood in the alley, heart pounding in her chest. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions and confusion. The girl, Lily, had just run again. She'd seen the fear in her eyes, and it was clear that something wasn't right. Whoever the girl had been talking about, this person was clearly controlling her, keeping her from Sophia. But who could it be? Why hadn't Lily run to her, into her arms, instead of running away in fear? Sophia knew she couldn't just stand there and let this go. There was something deep inside her that refused to give up, something that told her this was real, that the girl in the alley was her daughter, and that she was alive. The idea that Lily had survived and been kept away from her for all these years, kept in fear, made Sophia's blood run cold. She had to find out more. She couldn't just walk away again. She wouldn't. After a few moments of hesitation, Sophia made her decision. She would follow the girl. No matter how dangerous it might be, she couldn't let Lily slip away again. She turned and began walking back toward the street, trying to keep her calm, though her hands were trembling. Sophia's mind raced with questions. What had happened to Lily? Where had she been all these years? Why had she disappeared after the storm? And who was this person, the one the girl was so terrified of? Sophia had to find answers, no matter what. She walked quickly, her eyes scanning the streets. The girl had to be nearby. Sophia rounded the corner where the alley met the street, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, but the area was empty. The rain had started to fall harder, and the streets were nearly deserted. But Sophia knew she couldn't give up now. She had to keep looking. As she walked further, she tried to think about where the girl might have gone. There was a small park not far from here, a quiet, almost hidden place where people didn't usually go at night. It was a long shot, but it was the only place she could think of. She hurried toward the park, her feet splashing in the growing puddles. When she arrived, the park was eerily quiet. The swings swayed in the wind, and the trees rustled softly. There was no sign of the girl, but Sophia wasn't ready to give up yet. She walked through the park, calling out softly, "Lily, it's me. It's your mom. Please, come out." She repeated her plea, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and hope. The silence was deafening, and her footsteps echoed through the empty space. She stopped near the far side of the park, where a small wooden bench sat under a tree. It was there that she saw something. Movement from the shadows. Her heart leaped in her chest. A figure stepped out of the darkness, and there, standing in front of her, was the girl again. This time, she didn't run. She just stood there, staring at Sophia with wide eyes. Her face was pale, her body trembling. She looked like she wanted to say something, but no words came out. Sophia could see the conflict in her eyes. It was clear the girl didn't know whether to trust her or not. "Lily," Sophia whispered, stepping closer. "It's really you, isn't it? Please, you don't have to be scared anymore. I'm here. I've been looking for you all this time." The girl finally spoke, her voice barely more than a whisper. "I don't know if I can trust you," she said, her voice shaking. "He said you'd be gone, that you wouldn't care about me anymore." Sophia's heart broke. "I will always care about you, Lily. I'm your mom. I never stopped looking for you. You've been taken from me for too long, but I won't let them keep you anymore. I'll protect you. I promise." The girl seemed to hesitate for a moment, as if unsure of what to do. Then, slowly, she stepped forward and looked up at Sophia, her eyes searching her face for any sign of a lie. When she saw none, she nodded just slightly. "I don't know what's happening, "But I want to come home," Lily whispered. "I'm scared. I just want to go home with you." Sophia's eyes filled with tears. Finally, after 7 long years, her daughter was in front of her again. She reached out, pulling Lily into a warm, tight embrace. It was everything Sophia had dreamed of, but at the same time, it was overwhelming. The girl in her arms was no longer the little girl she remembered, but a teenager who had been through something terrible, something Sophia didn't understand. "Don't worry," Sophia whispered, stroking her daughter's hair. "We'll figure this out together. I'm not letting you go. No one will take you away from me again." Lily clung to her tightly, as if afraid that if she let go, she might vanish again. Sophia held her close, her mind already working, trying to figure out what to do next. They needed to get away, to find somewhere safe. But there were still so many questions. Who was this man who had kept Lily away? And why had he done it? For now, though, all that mattered was that her daughter was in her arms. They would face whatever came next, together. Sophia held Lily tightly, her heart still racing with emotion. The weight of the years without her daughter seemed to melt away in that moment, replaced by a fierce protective instinct. As she stood there in the quiet park, she could hardly believe that after all this time, Lily was finally in her arms again. But despite the joy she felt, there was still so much she didn't understand. The fear in Lily's eyes, the mention of someone who had kept her away. It all left Sophia with more questions than answers. "Lily," Sophia said softly, pulling back just enough to look at her daughter's face. "Who was it? Who's been keeping you away from me?" Lily's eyes filled with hesitation, and she looked around nervously, as though afraid someone might be watching them. "I can't say much," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I don't know if you'll believe me, but he's dangerous. He's been watching me for years." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. "Who is he, Lily? What does he want from you?" Lily took a deep breath, her gaze flicking to the dark shadows around them. "His name is Mr. Wells. He said he was protecting me, that I couldn't go back to you because you'd be in danger." She paused, her voice lowering even further. "I don't know why he kept me away, but he made me do things I didn't want to do. He said I had to stay hidden so no one would find us." Sophia's mind was spinning. The name Mr. Wells meant nothing to her, but the way Lily spoke of him, the fear in her eyes, was enough to send a chill through her spine. She couldn't understand why someone would keep a child away from their mother, why Lily would be forced to live in hiding. But the one thing that was clear was that Mr. Wells wasn't just a stranger. He had control over her daughter's life, and Sophia couldn't stand the thought of Lily being controlled by anyone, especially someone who made her afraid. "We need to get away, Lily," Sophia said firmly, gripping her daughter's shoulders. "You don't have to go back to him. You're safe now. I'll take care of you." Lily looked up at her with wide eyes. "But he's dangerous, Mom. He has people watching me, even now. If we try to leave, they'll come after us." Sophia felt a pang of fear, but her determination only grew stronger. She couldn't let this man keep her daughter in fear anymore. "We'll go somewhere safe. We'll figure it out, one step at a time. I won't let him hurt you." Lily seemed to think for a moment, her brow furrowed with worry. "I want to believe you, Mom, but I don't know what he'll do if he finds us. He has eyes everywhere. I don't even know how to escape." Sophia pulled her daughter close again, her mind working quickly. She knew they had to act fast. If Mr. Wells was really watching Lily, then they had little time before he realized she was gone. But where could they go? Who could they trust? "I don't care how hard it is," Sophia said softly. "We'll figure it out together. I'll protect you, and I promise you'll never have to go back to him." Lily nodded slowly, but Sophia could see the doubt in her eyes. She was still scared, still unsure of what would happen next. Sophia understood. She'd spent 7 years living with the uncertainty of losing her family. And now she was standing at the edge of a new nightmare, the unknown danger that Mr. Wells represented. "We need to leave now," Sophia said firmly. "We have to get to a place where no one can find us. Somewhere safe." Lily nodded, though her fear still lingered. Where do we go? I don't know who we can trust. Sophia thought for a moment, then remembered a small cabin her parents had owned years ago, a quiet retreat in the mountains far from the city. It was isolated, hidden from the main roads, and it was the perfect place to hide. She could take Lily there, give them time to figure out their next move, and hopefully keep Mr. Wells from finding them. We're going to my parents' cabin, Sophia said, her voice steady with resolve. We'll go there. It's far enough away that no one will find us, at least not right away. We'll be safe there. Lily looked up at her, her eyes still filled with worry. You really think that'll be enough to keep him away? Sophia nodded. It has to be. We can't stay here. We have to go before he realizes you're gone. Without wasting another moment, they left the park, walking quickly toward the street. Sophia kept a protective arm around Lily's shoulders as they moved through the city, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of someone watching them. Her heart was still racing, but she had made up her mind. There was no turning back. They would make it to the cabin, and from there, they would figure out how to stop Mr. Wells and keep Lily safe. No matter what it took, Sophia wouldn't let him take her daughter again. Sophia and Lily hurried through the streets, their footsteps quick but careful, as though they could somehow outrun the fear that was creeping in on them. Every corner they turned felt like a new risk, but Sophia kept her eyes ahead, determined to get them both to safety. She could feel the weight of the danger hanging over them, but she refused to let it show. She wouldn't let Lily see how scared she really was. As they approached the edge of the city, the streets grew quieter. The sounds of the bustling city faded into the background, replaced by the occasional car passing by. The night felt colder now, the rain still falling softly, but Sophia knew they couldn't stop. They had to keep moving, no matter how exhausted they were. Do you think he knows we're leaving? Lily asked in a quiet voice, her eyes scanning their surroundings. Sophia didn't want to answer her daughter's question with certainty, but the truth was clear. Mr. Wells could be anywhere. His reach seemed endless. He had kept Lily hidden for so long, watching her every move. There was no telling what he would do if he realized they were gone. I don't know, Sophia replied honestly, but we're not going to let him catch us. We'll make it to the cabin, and then we'll figure out what to do next. We're strong, and we'll be safe there. Lily nodded, but her fear was still visible in her eyes. Sophia could tell she was scared, and she wished she could take that fear away. But all she could do was keep her daughter close and assure her that they would be okay. It wasn't long before they reached the outskirts of the city, where the roads became less crowded and the buildings fewer. The cabin was still a long way away, but they were closer to safety than they had been before. Sophia kept her pace steady, knowing the worst thing they could do now was draw attention to themselves. They needed to be as quiet as possible, like shadows in the night. They were halfway to their destination when Sophia felt a sudden unease creep up her spine. She glanced around quickly, her instincts telling her that something wasn't right. The streets were still empty, but it felt like they weren't as alone as they should be. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching them. Lily, she whispered, her voice low. Stay close to me. Don't make a sound. Lily's eyes widened in fear, but she didn't argue. She moved closer to her mother, her steps quiet as she followed behind. They continued down the street, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that someone was just out of sight, tracking them. Every car that passed seemed too slow, every shadow too still. Sophia quickened her pace, trying to get further away from the city's edge, hoping that the isolation of the countryside would give them a better chance of escaping unnoticed. But the tension in her chest only grew. She couldn't help it. Her gut was telling her they weren't alone. Someone was following them. Finally, as they neared a turn in the road, Sophia risked a glance over her shoulder. At first, she saw nothing, just the empty street behind them. But then, in the distance, she spotted a figure. It was hard to make out at first, but it looked like a man, moving swiftly but carefully, just far enough behind them to remain unnoticed. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. It was Mr. Wells, or someone working for him. She didn't know for sure, but she was certain they were being followed. Her hand instinctively reached for Lily's, squeezing it tightly. "Lily, run," she whispered urgently, her voice barely audible. "We have to get to the cabin. Now." Lily's face turned pale, but she didn't hesitate. Together, they began to run, their feet pounding against the wet pavement. The sound of their hurried footsteps echoed in the still night, but Sophia couldn't stop. She could feel the presence behind them, growing closer, and the fear in her chest pushed her forward, faster and faster. They turned another corner, and ahead of them, the road seemed to stretch out into the darkness, leading them further into the quiet countryside. Sophia pushed her legs harder, her breath coming in short bursts, but she couldn't let up. She couldn't stop now. She had to protect her daughter. As they ran, the sound of footsteps behind them grew louder. They were closing in. Sophia dared not look back, but she knew they wouldn't outrun whoever was after them for long. They needed to get to safety. Then, just as she thought they might be caught, she spotted it, the entrance to a small, winding dirt road that led into the trees. It was hidden, barely noticeable, and it was their only chance. "Lily, this way," Sophia called, grabbing her daughter's hand and pulling her toward the road. They sprinted down it, the trees surrounding them on both sides, blocking out any light from the street. The darkness was heavy now, and the only sounds were their rapid breaths and the pounding of their footsteps. Sophia's heart raced as she and Lily sprinted down the narrow dirt road, the sound of their footsteps mixing with the rush of wind through the trees. Every second felt like an eternity, the heavy silence of the night broken only by their hurried breathing and the echo of the approaching footsteps behind them. Someone was getting closer. They were not alone. "Mom, I'm scared," Lily gasped, her voice full of fear. Her legs were slowing down, and Sophia could feel the weight of her daughter's fear growing with every step. But they couldn't stop. They couldn't slow down. Not now. "Stay close," Sophia said, her voice steady despite the rising panic in her chest. "We're almost there. Just a little further." The cabin was just up ahead, hidden deep within the trees. They had to make it there before whoever was chasing them caught up. The road ahead looked like a winding path, surrounded by thick woods, making it hard to see anything in the distance. But Sophia knew the way. She had been to the cabin many times before, though it had been years since her last visit. She only hoped that this time it would be the safe haven that they so desperately needed. The footsteps behind them were getting louder, closer. Whoever was following them was fast, too fast. Sophia risked a glance over her shoulder, her stomach twisting. Through the trees, she could barely make out the shadowy figure of a man. He was gaining on them, and there was no sign of stopping. "Faster, Lily," Sophia urged, her voice sharp with urgency. "We can't let him catch us." Lily pushed herself harder, but it was clear the fear was starting to wear her down. She stumbled slightly, but Sophia caught her arm just in time, pulling her back on track. "You're doing great, sweetheart," Sophia encouraged. "Keep going. We're almost there." They were so close, just a few more yards, and they would reach the cabin. But with each passing second, Sophia could hear the footsteps behind them getting closer and closer. The man was nearly on them. Suddenly, there was a loud crack. A branch snapped under the pressure of someone's foot. Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She didn't need to look back again to know they were almost there. But just as she felt a brief surge of hope, she heard a voice from behind. "Stop. You can't run forever." It was a man's voice, cold and commanding. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. It was Mr. Wells. She didn't need to see him to know. She could hear the authority in his voice, the control. He wasn't just a shadow in the woods. He was the one pulling the strings all along. And now he was here to finish what he had started. "No," Lily cried out, her voice trembling with terror. "Don't let him take me again." Sophia's grip tightened on her daughter's hand. She couldn't let him take her. Not now. Not after everything they had been through. They pushed forward, the cabin only a few more steps away, but it felt like an eternity. The sound of Mr. Wells's footsteps was right behind them now, almost as if he were breathing down their necks. He was so close. Sophia looked ahead, searching desperately for the cabin. Her mind raced, trying to think of a plan, any plan, that could give them the advantage. She had to get them inside. She had to get the door locked. The trees were dense around them, but just up ahead, there it was, the small old wooden cabin, nestled against a hill and hidden by a thick cluster of trees. It was their only hope. "Lily, I need you to be brave, okay?" Sophia said, her voice shaking but steady. "We're going to make it. You have to trust me." Lily nodded, her face pale but determined. "I trust you, Mom." They pushed themselves harder, feet flying over the uneven ground, pushing through the branches and bushes that grew along the path. The cabin was almost within reach, and just as they were a few feet from the door, they heard a loud shout from behind them. "Stop!" Mr. Wells's voice echoed through the trees. "You can't outrun me." Sophia's heart pounded in her chest, and she made a split-second decision. They had to get inside. Now. She reached for the door handle, but it wouldn't budge. Her pulse quickened in panic. The door was locked. Lily's eyes were wide with fear, her breath shallow. "Mom, hurry." Sophia turned around, hearing the man's footsteps growing closer. He was right there. He was nearly on them. With one final tug, the door creaked open. Sophia shoved it wide and pulled Lily inside, slamming it shut behind them with all her strength. They were in. Breathing heavily, Sophia leaned against the door, trying to steady her racing heart. She quickly glanced around the cabin. The air smelled of old wood and dust, and the dim light of the moon filtered through the windows. It was quiet for the moment, but she knew it wouldn't be for long. "We're not safe yet," Sophia whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "Stay here, Lily. I need to find a way to lock the windows." Sophia sat in the dimly lit room, her heart racing as she clutched Lily close. The danger they had just narrowly escaped still buzzed in the air, but the relief was too great to ignore. For 7 years, Sophia had believed that her family was lost forever. Now, they were together again, and Mark, her husband, was still out there, trying to get to them. The silence in the cabin was almost deafening. After the fight with the men in the woods, everything seemed eerily calm, but Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that something was still off. She kept her eyes on the door, wondering if more of them would come. Suddenly, a crackling sound came from a small old radio in the corner of the room. Sophia's breath caught. She had almost forgotten about it. Jason had been fiddling with it all evening, and now the radio was coming to life. A familiar voice echoed through the static. "Sophia, Sophia, are you there?" Sophia's knees nearly buckled as she recognized the voice. It was Mark. Her hand flew to her mouth, and tears welled up in her eyes. "Mark, is it really you?" she whispered, almost afraid to believe it. There was a long pause before Mark responded, his voice faint but unmistakable. "It's me, babe. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to leave, but they—" He stopped, the transmission crackling before he continued. "They had us, but we've been fighting back. Jason and I have been working together to get to you." Sophia couldn't contain herself. "You've been alive all this time," she cried, her voice breaking. "Why didn't you come back sooner? I thought you were gone. Dead." I know. I should have found a way back." Mark's voice sounded filled with regret. "But they kept us hidden. It was like we were prisoners, and we couldn't get to you. They were watching us all the time." Sophia sat in stunned silence. The anger she had held for all these years, thinking Mark had abandoned her, melted away as she listened to his words. He was sorry. He had tried to get back, but he was trapped. He wasn't the one who had disappeared willingly. He had been forced to leave. "We're going to be together again, Sophia," Mark said, his voice full of hope. "I promise. Just hang on a little longer. We're close. They can't stop us now." Jason, who had been standing nearby, leaned in to hear Mark's voice over the radio. His eyes met Sophia's with a quiet understanding. He had helped Mark escape, kept him safe all these years, and now he was one step closer to bringing Mark and Lily home for good. Sophia took a deep breath. She wasn't afraid anymore. The family she thought she had lost forever was coming back. There was still danger ahead, she knew that, but the fear wasn't as strong now. She had her daughter. She had the promise of Mark's return. And for the first time in years, hope felt real again. "We'll wait for you, Mark," Sophia said, her voice steady. "We'll be ready. You're coming home." As the radio clicked off, the room fell silent again. But this time, the silence was filled with anticipation, not fear. They were no longer running. They were a family, reunited by fate, and together, they would face whatever came next.